The United States, if it was a company on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, we would call it a zombie company. Why? Because it doesn't make enough money to cover its debt obligations, right? So that makes it a zombie company. It's just it's operating in a perpetual zombie mode, which is it has to borrow more money in order to pay off what it borrowed before. If you look at it, the cost of interest now is approaching $1 trillion a year for the U.S. Treasury.
The executive summary of the U.S. government's fiscal year 2022 financial report, titled An Unsustainable Fiscal Path, was published earlier in the year by the U.S. Treasury Department. According to the research, a sustainable fiscal strategy is one in which the ratio of public debt held to GDP, or the debt to GDP ratio, is steady or decreasing over the long term. It goes on to explain that since GDP calculates the size of the country's economy, in terms of the total value of the finished goods and services produced in a year, it is crucial to take into account GDP-related financial results when determining the economy's ability to support the government's numerous programs. The research also states that the nation's existing fiscal course cannot continue, since the economy cannot support the costs of the many programs run by the government. It comes to the conclusion that significant policy adjustments must be done right away. By the end of 2023, the U.S. debt to GDP ratio is predicted to reach 133% of GDP and continue to rise eternally, according to Trading Economics global macro models. This is due to the fact that the United States has so many necessary expenses that the only way to move forward is to keep borrowing money and inflating, or else watch the economy die an agonizing horrible death. James Lavish, a well-known macro analyst and former hedge fund manager, claims that the United States has managed to embed itself firmly in a bad debt spiral and that the only way out is to dig even more. In a recent interview with the Understanding Macro YouTube channel, he shared his thoughts on the country's budgetary trajectory and what lay next. Because of the numerous bad decisions that have been made in the past and are likely to be made in the future, he thinks there is a 100% possibility that the U.S. economy will collapse at some point in the future. We'll now show you some significant snippets from the conversation. Take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications if you want to see more content like it.
I talk about the debt spiral so much, and this is a really important topic. The United States, if it was a company on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, we would call it a zombie company. The United States has to issue more treasuries in order to pay down the treasuries that are maturing. Here's the problem. As it issues more treasuries, it's issuing those at 5% or plus on some of these notes. But it's paying off treasuries, it's retiring treasuries that were only yielding somewhere around 1, maybe 1.5% at most. And so we're now issuing treasuries that we're going to make that deficit gets worse, because now we're paying interest on bonds that's far higher than the interest that was, on the bonds that were retiring. And so if you look at it, the cost of interest now is approaching $1 trillion a year for the U.S. Treasury. Okay, what are your biggest expenses in the United States? You've got three main expenses that are kind of mandatory, right? You've got your entitlements, which are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and those add up to over $3.8 trillion. Okay, then you've got your defense spending. That's necessary. So while the entitlements are signed into legislation, you have no choice. You must pay those. Those are in legislation, right? They're laws. You have to pay those. The other thing you have is defense. Those are long-term contracts with these defense providers. You don't want to, not pay for defense in your defense contract. There's a whole debate about how much of that is necessary, and that doesn't even include what's going over to Ukraine. So that's just $800 billion there. Well, our expenses on our debt, our interest costs on our debt is over $1 trillion. It's approaching $1 trillion. It's more than we pay for defense every year now. Just basically the United States credit card debt. And if you look at it as if you were just an individual, say you're a single mom or a single dad, then you have You are working multiple jobs, you've got kids, right? And you're trying to meet that margin, but you're struggling to get there, right? Because you have to pay your mortgage, you have to pay or your rent, you have to pay for your food, you have to pay your car, because you need it to get to your job if you're not working remote, unlikely, right? And then you've got your kids, you've got to take care of your kids. So those are kind of mandatory expenses. None of those can really be cut out. And so if you're not making enough in your two jobs, what do? You don't have any more time to allocate to work. So you take out a credit card and you start running up that credit card. The problem is the interest rate on that credit card is high. And so eventually you get that to a limit. And what do? Well, you're not able to pay it off because you're not making enough money. You're still paying all these mandatory expenses. You take out another credit card. And then that runs up, and then another credit card. And eventually, Ryan, your credit is destroyed. Nobody trusts that you will pay that back anymore, and nobody will extend you credit. Now, I don't think that's going to happen in the United States next year, but that is down the road. That is where we're going to. And the proof of that is true. It's pure math. There's no way you can defend what we're doing mathematically. It's pure math that sometime in the future, the US dollar will hyperinflate and fail. We'll probably be the last currency to do so. We have the benefit of being the global reserve currency, and the Treasury is a global reserve asset, which perpetuates the need for dollars, which is why it's going to stay entrenched as a global reserve currency. But eventually, people will stop to trust the United States, not because they think they're going to default on their debt, but because they don't trust that the inflation numbers are right, and they know that the United States has no choice but to print more money in order to monetize their own debt, because we have so much debt in our system. We have so much debt on the Treasury balance sheet that every single time more notes come due, we need to issue more. We issue more treasuries. And eventually, Ryan, the balance sheets of these corporations and sovereigns are going to be crowded out, and there's just not going to be demand for them anymore. And that's when we hit that point of inflection where that confidence is lost. The marginal buyer is gone. The United States has to pretty much monetize all of their debt, and it's game over. And is that going to happen today or tomorrow? No. Is it going to happen in 3 years? I don't think so. 5 years? No, probably not. 15 years? 20? Maybe. 50 years? Probably. 100 years? 100% likelihood. I believe that we need some sort of system to get away from that system. I believe that we need some sort of currency, some sort of store of value that can't be infringed upon. It cannot be seized. It cannot be censored. And so for me, it emboldens and bolsters my confidence in Bitcoin. There's absolutely nothing that can match it in the world. And so when you look at places like Lebanon or Venezuela or Argentina, the people in these or Ghana, they're Zimbabwe, they're people who are being oppressed, who are unbanked. They have no way to save their money, or if they do put it in a bank, it inflates to nothing, and they just wind up losing it. So being American centric, so many people say, yeah, but Bitcoin is so volatile. It's not a store of value. It's so volatile. Yeah, you tell that to somebody in Venezuela who's experienced 100% value inflation this past 8 or 10 months. It doesn't matter to them if Bitcoin is volatile. Bitcoin has demonstrated that it's volatile, but it's an appreciating asset. It's okay if it's volatile and appreciating. It's bad if it's volatile and depreciating, which is what's happening to their currencies. It's the exact opposite situation. It's a no-brainer. What would you want? Would you want to have your money in Venezuela dollars, or would you want it in Bitcoin? It's a pretty simple answer, right? So what we're seeing is that people are realizing that there's these infringement on their rights. So if they want to leave that area that is infringing on their rights, is being controlling, or they have some sort of dictator as a ruler, then if they can get out, they can actually take all of their money with them. I mean, I know somebody from Venezuela that did that, got his whole family out and their life savings. If they hadn't had Bitcoin, he would have lost it all. They would have had to walk away from all of it. But they were able to sell their house, sell their belongings, buy Bitcoin, cross the border, and never look back.
What do you think about James Lavish's eloquent portrayal of the U.S. debt spiral at the end of the fiat Ponzi and Bitcoin's function as a hedge against the impending catastrophe? Please share your thoughts and views in the space provided below. Additionally, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications for more content like this. Thank you for watching.